I was not looking for the Carnegie correspondence when I found it. I was reading through the Frederick P. Keppel papers at the New York Public Library's Manuscript Division in the third-floor reading room on 42nd Street, looking for material on the 1923 reorganization of the educational testing programs. I had a request slip in for a single box. The page I was sent contained, by what the archivist later called a transfer error, 4 sheets of internal Carnegie Corporation Library Division correspondence dated October and November of 1908. The pages were typed in faded purple carbon ink. The donor card on the folder said the materials had been deposited in 1947 under a 30-year restriction. By the math on the donor card, they should have been opened in 1977. By the catalog notation, they were still restricted. They were in my hands anyway. I read them twice. I copied them in pencil into the back of my own notebook, because the reading room does not permit photographs of that series. By the time I went back the next morning to ask the archivist about it, the folder had been pulled. I'm going to show you what I found. But before I do, if this work matters to you, hit the subscribe button. The algorithm tends to bury this kind of research the way the families I'm about to name buried these records. Help me make sure it doesn't. Esther Whitcomb, born November 12, 1869, in a row house on Halleck Street in Allegheny City, Pennsylvania. Father Joseph Whitcomb, a roller at the Homestead Steel Works. Joseph was on the night shift the first week of July 1892 when the Pinkertons came up the Monongahela River on the barges. He survived. 7 men from his crew did not. He never spoke of it inside the house. Esther was 22 years old that summer and already cataloging in the basement reference room of the Allegheny Library. Mother Catherine, born in Tipperary, came over in 1861, took in laundry from the riverfront boarding houses to supplement the steel wages. Esther was one of 7 children, only the third to survive infancy. The other 2 were brothers, James and Daniel, both of whom went into the mills. Trained at the Pittsburgh Library School from 1892 to 1894, one of the first cohorts certified by the Pennsylvania State Library Commission. She studied under Ann Wallace and the early Dewey men who came down from Albany to lecture. She started at the Carnegie Free Library of Allegheny City, the first Carnegie Library in the United States, opened February of 1890 as a junior cataloger at $11 a week. By 1908, she had 14 years of service on the books. She was promoted that spring to compliance inspector for the Carnegie Free Library Central Office on Forbes Avenue, the first woman in the inspector's office. One quirk worth noting, she wrote everything in mechanical pencil. Steel pen ink ran when she walked to work in the rain, and Pittsburgh rain in November was constant and gray and laid a slick on the granite sidewalks that made her father, by then retired, refuse to walk with her past the trolley stop. She carried a leather notebook embossed with the initials E.A.W., Esther Ann Whitcomb, a gift from her father after his 1903 retirement from the Homestead Works. The notebook went everywhere she went. Why, she was in the room. The inspector's office assigned her to audit Carnegie grant compliance at libraries across western Pennsylvania, beginning with the Braddock Library, the first Carnegie library funded in the United States, opened March of 1889. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1908, something arrived in the mail at the inspector's office on Forbes Avenue that she could not file. A revised, standardized library requirements document sent from the Carnegie Corporation Central Office at 522 Fifth Avenue, New York, 12 pages, printed in a small private run on crane bond paper with a watermark, not in the publicly available materials series. The cover sheet was signed in ink, but the signature was illegible, and the typed name beneath it had been struck through with a single horizontal line of typewriter dashes. The document listed conditions for receiving, and continuing to receive, Carnegie Library funding. The conditions had changed. The previous version Esther had been working from, dated 1898, listed 5 requirements: a free site, a municipal commitment to maintenance at 10% of the grant per year, a reading room open to the public, a local librarian, an annual report. 5. The new version listed 23. The new requirements specified architectural floor plans in the Italian Renaissance Revival manner, with central rotunda dimensions stipulated to within 6 inches, shelving heights, lighting fixtures, Welsbach gas mantles in towns without electric service, specific tungsten filaments where electricity was available. The typeface used for the building name above the door, Bodoni capitals, no exceptions. They also specified a recommended opening day catalog. 1,400 titles selected by an advisory committee in New York. She did not yet understand why the title list mattered. She would. Andrew Carnegie, born November 25, 1835, in Dunfermline, Scotland, son of a hand-loom weaver displaced by the steam looms that came in through the Forth ports. Family emigrated in 1848 to Allegheny, Pennsylvania, settling 4 blocks from the riverfront. Carnegie worked as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill at $1.20 a week, then telegraph messenger, then telegrapher for the Pennsylvania Railroad under Thomas A. Scott. By 1872, he was building Carnegie Steel on the Monongahela. By 1901, he sold Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan for $480 million in U.S. steel bonds, the largest commercial transaction in business history to that point. The papers were signed in the library of his 51st Street house. Morgan, when asked later what it had felt like, said only that he had made Carnegie the richest man in the world that afternoon. He had begun library philanthropy at Dunfermline in 1883. By his death in 1919, 1,689 libraries had been funded in the United States alone, 2,509 worldwide, at a total cost of roughly $60 million in period money, closer to $1.8 billion in modern terms. The grants were channeled through a small office staff. 8 people in 1905, 14 in 1908. 26 by the time of the corporation charter in 1911. The Gospel of Wealth essay, published in 1889 in the North American Review, made Carnegie's argument that the wealthy had a moral duty to administer their fortunes for the public good. He wrote that the man who dies rich dies disgraced. He also wrote, in the same essay, that the administrator of the wealth was the proper judge of how it was to be spent. The two halves of the sentence are usually quoted separately. The Carnegie Corporation of New York was chartered November 10, 1911, the institutional vehicle that took over the library program from his personal philanthropy. Initial endowment, $125 million. The American Library Association had been founded in 1876 in Philadelphia at the Centennial Exposition, in a meeting room above a printer's shop on Locust Street. Melville Dewey, founder of the Dewey Decimal Classification, also 1876, was advisor to the Carnegie Library program from 1908 onward. He drew a salary of $2,000 a year for the consultancy. He also drew, separately, a percentage on cataloging supplies sold through his library bureau company to the Carnegie libraries that adopted the standardized requirements. The Library Bureau had been incorporated in 1888. By 1908, it was the largest supplier of library shelving, cards, and cabinets in North America. I am not going to tell you Andrew Carnegie built 1,689 libraries to control what Americans read. I do not have proof of that. What I am going to tell you is that the requirements for receiving and continuing to receive a Carnegie grant after 1908 included specific cataloging standards, specific architectural floor plans, specific recommended titles, and a specific curriculum advisory committee in New York, and that those requirements were drafted in offices on Fifth Avenue by people who never set foot in Braddock or McKeesport or Beaver Falls. The drafting was done by the Carnegie Corporation Library Division. The standardized cataloging requirements were attached as Schedule B. The Curriculum Advisory Committee met 4 times a year in a private room above the Century Association on West 43rd Street. The records of those meetings, when they survive at all, survive only as minutes from which the names of attendees have been redacted in a hand that does not match the typewriter. The secretary who countersigned the standardized requirements in the years after 1923 was Robert M. Lester, secretary of the Carnegie Corporation from 1923 to 1954. A man whose own papers at Columbia run to 42 linear feet and are still, in 2 of those feet, restricted. Back to Whitcomb, back to the Braddock Library on the morning of October 27, 1908. The Braddock Library reading room, quarter-sawn oak tables, 6 of them set in 2 rows of 3 under the central rotunda. Green-shaded electric lamps installed the previous year, 1907, replacing the original gas fixtures. A portrait of Carnegie above the circulation desk in a heavy gilt frame, 3/4 view, painted from the 1891 photograph. The Italian Renaissance Revival ceiling with its plaster medallion at the center of the rotunda, the 4 classical figures in the corners representing knowledge, industry, charity, and music. Esther sat at the head table on Tuesday, October 27, 1908, with the new requirements document open beside the old one, 2 sheets of 1,400 title opening day catalog, organized in 47 categories, and the second list, the list of books to be removed, 267 titles, Henry George's Progress and Poverty, 1879, the entire single tax tradition, Ida Tarbell's History of the Standard Oil Company, 1904, both volumes, multiple antitrust treatises, including Henry Demarest Lloyd's Wealth Against Commonwealth from 1894, multiple labor history books, all 6 volumes of the official Pinkerton Report on the Homestead Strike of 1892, the strike her father had survived. Her hands going still on the page. She read it twice, then a third time, Then she folded the document into her notebook and walked out of the library into the November rain. She walked the 3 miles back down the river road to the trolley stop. She did not take an umbrella. The notebook went under her coat. She visited the McKeesport Carnegie Library 3 days later, on Friday, October 30th. Same revised list, same 267 removals. The librarian, a Mr. Ezra Holloway, age 52, a former Methodist minister who had taken the library post in 1902, had already begun pulling the titles. He had them stacked on a cart in the basement workroom under a canvas tarp. He had been instructed, he said, to wait for further instructions on disposition. The instructions had not come. She wrote that night to a former classmate from the Pittsburgh Library School who had taken a post at the Beaver Falls Carnegie Library, and a woman named Mary Stenger. The reply came back on November 4th. The same list at Beaver Falls, the same instruction, the same pause. Layer 3. In the inspector's correspondence files on Forbes Avenue, Esther found a memo from the Carnegie Corporation Library Division, dated September 18, 1908, 6 weeks before the requirements document had been mailed, referencing a review board composed of 7 men. The memo was a routing slip, 2 paragraphs, initialed in 3 places. 6 of the 7 names on the review board were not in any publicly available Carnegie Corporation roster. Not in the 1899 roster, not in the 1905 roster, not in the 1912 roster, not in the 1923 reorganization roster. Layer 4, she tracked one name, a Mr. Cornelius Boswick, listed as a library consultant with a Manhattan address on West 23rd Street near 6th Avenue. She wrote a polite letter requesting clarification on Schedule B. The letter came back 6 weeks later, marked addressee unknown at this address. She wrote to a cousin in New York, who walked the block on her behalf. The address was a postal box rental, a stationer's shop with a wall of locked boxes behind the counter. Box 117, rented in the name of an attorney's office that, when her cousin inquired further, turned out to be an answering service for 3 separate companies, none of which had any verifiable office space anywhere in the city. Layer 5, in a desk drawer at the Braddock Library, in the librarian's office on the 2nd floor, in a drawer that had been left unlocked because the keys had been mislaid since the lamp installation the previous year, Esther found a separate letter, dated August 14, 1907, 12 months before the new requirements document was mailed, instructing the local Braddock librarian to begin, in the language of the letter, preparing the shelves for changes that would come the following autumn. The letter was typed on letterhead reading, Andrew Carnegie, 2 East 91st Street, New York, Carnegie's personal residence, not the corporation. It was not signed by Carnegie. It was signed in the same struck-through hand as the requirements cover sheet. The 7th man on the review board, whose name was scratched out and retyped on the September memo, was the same hand again. 3 documents, 1 unidentified signatory. She wrote that night in her notebook a single line. Someone has been working on this for at least 14 months. I am the 2nd person inside this office to know. There was a 6th layer she found in the following week, though she did not understand it as a layer at the time, a bound volume of acquisitions invoices for the Braddock Library covering 1906 through 1908. The invoices in the volume were chronological, except for a 30-page gap in late summer of 1907. The pages had been cut out at the binding with a sharp blade, leaving the stubs visible if you held the volume open against the lamp. The accession numbers on either side of the gap did not align with the running serial. 63 accession numbers were missing. 63 books had entered the library and left it again in the summer before the new requirements were drafted, without ever appearing in the public catalogue. She was not the only one to notice. There was a second inspector, Walter Mensch, working out of the Cleveland office of the Carnegie Free Library system, 51 years old, German-born, 23 years in the Carnegie service. Mensch wrote to the New York Central Office in May of 1908, 5 months before the revised requirements arrived, questioning the legality, under the original grant agreements with the city of Cleveland, of any centrally imposed cataloging standard. He cited the 1898 document, Clause 4, Line 9. His position was eliminated by the end of the year. The Cleveland inspector's office was, the corporation said in a brief notice, being consolidated with the Pittsburgh office for reasons of administrative efficiency. There was a reporter, Estelle Lambert, 29 years old, working for the Pittsburgh Press out of the 5th Avenue newsroom. The daughter of a Wilkinsburg streetcar conductor, 2 years at the Pittsburgh High School for Girls, then straight into copy, she wrote a single column about the Braddock removals in November of 1908. 240 words. She had it set in galley. The column was pulled before press. She was reassigned to society copy by Christmas. She never wrote about libraries again. There was a lawyer, Charles W. Ridder, of the firm Ridder, Knox and Beale, on 4th Avenue in Pittsburgh, who represented the Allegheny County Library Board on retainer. Ridder, in a quiet letter dated January 19, 1909, objected to the architectural mandates on the grounds that they exceeded the contractual scope of the original 1890 grant agreement. His firm lost the Carnegie Corporation legal work the following year. The retainer went to Reed, Smith, Shaw, and Maclay across the street. 3 witnesses, 3 records, 3 lives that quietly came undone in the same 18 months. None of them ever spoke to each other. How the truth got buried. The Carnegie Corporation Internal Review of 1929, conducted in the wake of the Foundation's reorganization under Frederick Keppel, rationalized the historical record and consolidated the early library division correspondence, including the September 1908 Review Board memo and the August 1907 Preparing the Shelves letter, into a single restricted series. The series was deposited at Columbia University's Rare Book and Manuscript Library on the Morningside Heights campus under a 30-year restriction. The 30 years ran out in 1959. The series was not opened. The Great Depression closures of the 1930s absorbed many of the smaller Carnegie libraries into municipal systems. In the absorptions, the original requirements documents on Crane bond paper, the working copies kept at the local libraries, were boxed up and in dozens of documented cases lost. The Braddock copy was lost in 1936 during the consolidation with the borough library system. The McKeesport copy was lost in 1941 during a basement flood. In 1971, certain Carnegie Corporation papers at Columbia were reclassified as donor-restricted scholarly access by application only. The application required a letter from a tenured faculty member, a statement of research purpose, and a countersignature from the corporation's general counsel. The Standardized Requirements series was among the reclassified. The Foundation's Authorized History, published in 1989 for the corporation's 75th anniversary, omits the review board entirely. I'm not going to tell you the books on the 1908 removal list were chosen to make industrial labor look unreasonable. I do not have proof of that. What I am going to tell you is that Henry George's Progress and Poverty, Ida Tarbell's History of the Standard Oil Company, and 6 volumes documenting the Homestead Strike were all on a removal list issued in 1908 by an office in Manhattan, whose review board members are not, to this day, fully identified in any publicly available roster. I am not the first person to find this. I am the first person to publish it in a form they cannot pull from the record before you see it. This is not a story about libraries. It is a story about how the system that decided what 1,689 American towns were allowed to read in 1908 is still here, under different names, doing the same thing. Modern Foundation-funded curriculum standards, private philanthropy, underwriting the textbook adoption committees in 38 states, the reading lists that arrive in school district central offices already printed, already bound, already cross-referenced to the testing instruments that will measure whether the children have absorbed them, the same families. The Carnegie Corporation still exists. So does the Rockefeller philanthropy. So do the libraries built with their money. So do the shelves. The shelves are still there. The titles that are on them are there because someone decided they should be. The titles that are not on them are not there because someone decided they should not be. The mechanism has not changed, only the language has changed. Esther Whitcomb was not a confused woman. She had catalogued more than 14,000 books in the 14 years between 1894 and 1908. She knew what a removal list looked like. She knew what a requirements document looked like. She knew when a public mission had been quietly amended by a private board. She had grown up in the house of a Homestead steelworker who came home in July of 1892 and did not speak for 3 days. She knew what it looked like when the men with the money decided what the men with the wages were going to be permitted to know, and she spent the remaining 26 years of her life trying to tell us what arrived in her office on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1908. We did not listen. Maybe it is time we did. Return to the reading room at Braddock, the quarter-sawn oak tables, the green-shaded lamps, the portrait above the circulation desk, three-quarter view, the heavy gilt frame, the 1891 face, the Italian Renaissance revival ceiling with the 4 corner figures. Knowledge, industry, charity, music, the shelves along the north wall, the south wall, the west wall, the titles that are there, the titles that are not. 267 empty places that nobody walking in today would know were empty because the shelves have been respaced and the cards have been refiled and the catalogue has been retyped. The October rain on the rotunda skylight. Esther Whitcomb's leather notebook with the initials EAW closed on the desk by her right hand. Pulled, withdrawn, reclassified, quietly removed. The archive was never destroyed. It was just buried. In the next investigation, I am opening the War Industries Board procurement files for the DuPont Company in the winter of 1917. The smokeless powder contracts, the Treasury bond ledger that shows who profited from every bullet fired in France is one filing cabinet over. I will see you there. Until then, count the entries.